This is the Politics of Slavery, Element 3, about the presidential election of 1860 and how it contributed to the beginnings of the Civil War. And as many of you may already know, the election of 1860 was very controversial because of this guy, Abraham Lincoln. Now, Lincoln was very unique as a person, but also in terms of his physical stature for that time in history. He was 6'4" and 180 pounds, really, really tall and really skinny. He had unusually long legs, unusually long arms, and an unusually long neck to go along with a very high-pitched voice, despite what you might see on TV shows and movies about him or anything like that. The guy, Daniel Day-Lewis, who portrayed him in the movie Lincoln, probably had his voice the most right of anybody. Very, very high-pitched. Lincoln was born in Kentucky in a log cabin in 1809. He was mostly self-educated and a very avid reader. You can see on this drawing here, if you look at the shovel has math equations on it. It was often rumored about Abraham Lincoln, and some people were very serious about it, that when he was a kid, he was so poor that he used to do math problems on the back of a shovel with a piece of coal. Above all else, Abraham Lincoln was a child of the frontier. He often said things in his high-pitched voice that were very frontierish, kind of like, get over here, or get over there, and heard, or like to say, I heard that, and when you say that with a high-pitched voice, it's kind of tough for people to take you seriously, I would imagine. But despite that, and despite his awkward frame, he was very intelligent and was an excellent wrestler and weightlifter. You never would have guessed it, but he was good at both of those things. It was just kind of odd for people to hear him talk sometimes, because, again, it was this high-pitched voice with this frontier accent. Lincoln was also known as an excellent storyteller, something that he put to good use over the course of his presidency. He would use analogies all the time and explain things in ways that made a lot of sense to people, and his down-home style and his storytelling abilities really enamored people to him, or enamored him to people, and drew people to him. But he also had struggles, particularly with depression. He had regular bouts with depression throughout his life, especially in his political career during the Civil War. Lincoln married the temperamental Mary Todd, who was from an upper-class family, but he loved her very much. A lot of other people didn't think she was the nicest lady, but he loved her. And he eventually became a skilled Illinois lawyer. But again, he was a little unusual, as was his nature, in the sense that he carried his papers in his hat, not a briefcase or a satchel or anything. He always wore the stovepipe hat and carried his legal papers in that. However, he became known as Honest Abe for refusing cases that bothered his conscience, and that earned him a lot of respect with people as well. As a result, he was a Whig, a member of the Whig Party, who was motivated by the Kansas-Nebraska Act to join the Republicans, and he had made the claim that he was against slavery. However, it should also be noted that Abraham Lincoln did not see a constitutional reason for slavery to end. Now remember, the 13th Amendment ending slavery doesn't come about until 1865, and the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says that anything not written in the Constitution is up to states to decide for themselves. At this time in history, in the 1850s, since nothing was written in the Constitution about slavery, at least not about it ending anyway, states had the right to determine slavery for themselves. Lincoln recognized that, even though he personally was opposed to it. In 1858, Lincoln decided to challenge Stephen Douglas for Douglas's Senate seat. Old Abe had baggy clothes, unpolished shoes, and the 5'4" little giant Douglas was clean, well-groomed, and America's best debater. Lincoln mounted a good challenge, but at their most famous debate in Freeport, Illinois, Douglas instituted what was called the Freeport Doctrine, as it would become known in history. Douglas established that he believed in popular sovereignty, that essentially a nation should not be influenced by outside forces in making their decisions, and therefore said that the people of a state should still choose whether they wanted slavery or not, regardless of what the Dred Scott decision had said. Now, this series of debates between Lincoln and Douglas in 1858 led to some very prominent results. Lincoln lost the Senate seat to Douglas, but now he was nationally known because he had taken the Little Giant on. Douglas, on the other hand, won the Senate seat, but may have lost his Southern Democratic support and a chance at the presidency in the upcoming 1860 election. Now, what caused him the support of the Democrats in the South? Well, the South loved him when he proposed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, but hated his competence on Lecompton, Dred Scott, and Freeport. Above all, Douglas always spoke his conscience, and that always meant supporting popular sovereignty, not his own political gain. So he was a huge advocate that if Kansas and Nebraska wanted to be free states, they should have the right to do so. The South, of course, wanted Douglas to continue saying that, or wanted him to say that Kansas and Nebraska, or at least Kansas, should be a slave state, and that wasn't something that Douglas was willing to do. He was very big on them determining things for themselves, and it probably cost him the support he was going to need as a Democrat in the election of 1860. But he does run anyway. In the election of 1860, we have a series of different candidates here. We have Abraham Lincoln, of course, running for the Republicans, versus John Breckinridge, right here, and Stephen Douglas. Now, the Northern Democrats wanted Douglas. The Southern Democrats did not. So the Democrats were voting for different candidates, which split their vote and opened the door for Abraham Lincoln. Now, the South was not pleased at all about this possibility taking place and warned that electing the quote-unquote abolitionist baboon Lincoln would lead to them leaving the Union and forming their own country. In truth, Lincoln didn't like slavery, like I mentioned before. But he wasn't an abolitionist either. He didn't want to see slavery abolished. He felt that the 10th Amendment gave the South the right to have slaves. Remember, if it's not written in the Constitution, the 10th Amendment says that it's up to states to decide. And the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery didn't come about until 1865, the end of the Civil War. So at this time in the 1860 election, the slavery issue was still up to each state. And constitutionally, despite his personal feelings, Lincoln agreed with that and said the Constitution says they should be able to choose. When it was all said and done, in the end, Lincoln wins the election of 1860 with 180 electoral college votes, but only 40% of the popular vote. So he won the majority in the electoral college, but was not a popular choice by any means. He wasn't even allowed on the ballot in 10 southern states, and didn't even get a single vote in those states, not even as a write-in. So people were understandably upset in the South when he got elected president. As a result, even before this could take place, the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln in March of 1861, 7 states had already left the United States. They had broken away and formed their own Confederate States of America back in February of 1861. So Lincoln gets elected, doesn't even get to make any decisions in the big chair yet. He basically just got elected and was waiting to take over. And while he was waiting to take over, 7 states decided that they were going to leave. That had to hurt the ego a little bit. In April of 1861, roughly 1 month after Lincoln was inaugurated, the Civil War would begin. Lincoln had been in office for about 1 month, and the whole country had been torn apart. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening.